Alex, welcome back to episode 26 or season 4, episode 4 of We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. I'm here because I'm always here. But joining me this time is Alan. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're going to talk about the format for the podcast. Everybody who's been here before knows part of the format of the podcast to talk about the format of the podcast. Here's the format of the podcast. 3 topics, 30 minutes. Roughly, that should equal 30 minutes at the end of the day, but we tend to overrun a little bit. We'll see if we can. We were like 6-7 minutes over last month. I need to rein it in a little bit this month, I think. But we've got exciting stuff to talk about because, of course, we do, because the world of unstructured data is always exciting. But first, our first topic. This is, real hot news. This is like a month old almost last time. If you remember, if you were with us last month, we were talking about Dan's new IDP market analysis, while this month we're talking about the new work intelligence market analysis that came out, say, about a month ago, but you might have missed it. If you're a subscriber to Deep Analysis, you already would, of course, received it, downloaded it, committed it to memory, and are quoting it to friends and family at, barbecues, family weddings, that kind of stuff. But if you haven't got a subscription and you still want it, you can download it. You're thinking, why do I want it, Matt? Well, let's talk about it, and maybe at the end of it, you'll decide whether you want it or whether you want to listen to the person talking about it at the family barbecue. So we'll talk a little bit about work intelligence and the report and dig into a little bits of the details again. Up on screen for people who are watching this on the video, hello, I can wave to you because you're watching. There's the cover, there's the content. This is the third edition. I should have remembered that, third edition of this report. It's a kind of a practice that we started in 2022, which is only 3 years ago, but it feels like an eon in technology terms and increasingly in macroeconomic terms, which we'll come to in a little bit when we start talking about numbers. But basically, the report itself it breaks down into being a little bit about the moving parts of the market. And work intelligence kind of consists of process and task mining, RPA, no code and low code, BPM, BPA. So basically, it's a whole bunch of existing markets, if you like, which are having significant overlaps with each other. In fact, they're all kind of individual little run times to run your business from. We write about that. We write some stuff about how the market's developing. We size the market. We size the sub-markets. We look at annual growth rates for those individual sub-markets as well. So if you really want to get into the weeds of what's going on over the next 5 years in terms of the growth of the process mining and task mining market, I suspect this is probably the only publication out there which has defensible data. In fact, any data, but all our data is defensible, so it's pretty much the only one out there, Alan, right?
It's absolutely the only one out there, and our definition, we use this term work intelligence. I mean, you just touched on it there. Work intelligence is not digital transformation, but instead digital harmonization, and that's the key to this, right? Is that we understand, and we're not even criticizing, we understand why other analyst firms, slice and dice things into little individual markets and have the magic quadrants and their waves and stuff. I get that. Mm-hmm. But the reality is you have an automation project. You want to automate this process. Okay, well, then you're going to be using probably all of these tools in one way, shape or form or another, or certainly a mixture of them. So we see them as one thing.
Yeah.
Tools to automate.
Yeah. A bit like, and we'll come to market sizing in detail a little bit later on in this podcast. We take it from a different direction. We work from what the business is trying to achieve backwards to where it meets technology. So business work intelligence was designed by us really to represent what organizations are trying to achieve with automation and then tracing it back to the tools that make it, rather than starting with the tools and then wondering what you could do with the tools. So again, a different approach to doing it. And what Alan was reading out there was the definition, the first working definition we had of work intelligence that we put together in October, November, I think, of 2022, which was really kind of to help us to define what it is and what it isn't. We've gone through a decade of digital transformation. For what that meant, no one ever was really clear, except that it probably didn't do anything transformative and certainly didn't turn analog businesses wholly digital. But we've gone through that period of people spending a lot of money to do these things without really realizing what actually the desired outcome for digital transformation was. What would digital transformation look like? What was the purpose of it? So rather than starting with the technology and working forwards at what that's going to transform, we started with work and worked our way backwards towards the technology. And the reason I brought this document up, I went and found it in my archives this week, and you can still download it. It's still available for free. It's still valid. It still explains at that kind of high level what work intelligence is, and it's free as well. I'll put the links. The links will be in the show notes if you're new to this. There will be show notes coming out. In fact, you might even be watching this alongside the show notes by the time this comes out. So all the links and stuff, the stuff we discussed, will be there. The reason I brought it up is I was actually looking for another quote, which is from the same report, which was about processes. The thing that probably hung around longest from that first report was very early. We kind of defined that the processes, process analysis, process mapping was really important to understand how your business works and therefore how you can append technology upon it, Alan. And that comes from really from the start that you made, sizing just this portion of work intelligence in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, so we should blow our own trumpet here. At the moment, all of the talk is around orchestration and armies of bots and blah 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 blah, right? And I say blah 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 blah, but it's important stuff. We nailed this early on, right? It's that
this is why we're richer than avarice right now, isn't it?
This is why we are the big guys in this space, yeah. But we nailed it early on. I mean, is that, okay, you can have a bot here, you can do RPA over there, you can do this, you can use process minings on your SAP implementation and find out where the bottlenecks are. Sure, you can do all of that. But ultimately, you need to look at all of this in context.
Yeah,
because that's the end goal. Is anybody there yet? Not a chance. They're not even close. But this is the journey. We're on that journey to get there. Whether we'll ever actually get there is a whole different question, right? But this is leading a lot of money and a lot of strategy and a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I think in terms of specifically around processes, actually leaving a lot of money and a lot of technology on the table right now. And I think if we were looking at something that maybe we got a little bit wrong, and maybe we'll see how the little bit we got it wrong in a little while as we work through the agenda for today, was that I think we both probably thought that the process and task mining revenue probably would be higher at this point than it actually has turned out to be.
Yes, and we'll fess up to that. We did get it wrong, but what's interesting is why we got it wrong is the fact that it should be much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Projects are going to fall flat on their face if they don't use these tools. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they just absolutely are. If you are talking about AI and automation, which everybody is right at the moment, from Doge in the US government and whatever, everywhere it's being talked about. Without process and task mining tools, your project has very little chance of success.
Yeah, and the quote, just for people who are listening to this from that first report, is the greater the range of processes analyzed in combination, the better we can understand them in the context of work itself. Now, there was a reason why I was going to look for that quote. It wasn't just self-aggrandizement, although there's obviously an element to that. I mean, there's an element of doing our own podcast, which is that anyway. But that's by the by. Looking at this particular new version of, we're covering, of course, as we go through each iteration of it. The market is updated, the market sizing updated, the compound annual growth rates are updated, but also the commentary around the market dynamics is updated, and of course that has changed. It has changed since we wrote the report this year, so it's a constant state of flux. And one of those areas we talked about within the market dynamics again was specifically around agents this year. And as we said, and again, I'm going to read this for people who can't watch it, but it's something from this year's report. The work intelligence is founded on the notion of balancing human and machine intelligence. It's likely that this combination will need to be applied in the form of process identification and augmentation to help find opportunities for agent projects that are couched in the real world of work rather than science fiction, however compelling, right? Which is basically a polite way of saying, you can't just invent use cases, you're going to have to find real ones, or this whole thing isn't going to work, people. Now, that's something I think we've been saying quite consistently, gradually through the versions, because in parallel to the work intelligence report, we've seen, Gen AI in terms of forms of assistance, and now more recently agents becoming very popular during that period of time. So work intelligence report has grown up in parallel to this market, Alan.
It absolutely has, and this is just sort of coincidence, but both you and I were on a briefing with Highland yesterday.
Yes.
And that's a briefing that wouldn't have happened a year ago from Highland, what they were talking about, at least, right? So, and they, one of many, but they are in the midst of this, and they were showing us, what they called agents. And to be fair, they were very practical, right? So those use cases do exist. And I won't go into detail on what we saw, but that was a good example, shall I say, right, of things. When I've been at Salesforce, and just a shout out to Salesforce, thank you for the sweatshirt which arrived this weekend.
Alan is wearing a very swanky agent blazer sweatshirt.
It is swanky, actually, as sweatshirts go. And but again, when I was at Trailblazer just a little while back, the examples of actual working agents were very practical. What I'm trying to say here is that when you, and we'll get to the word hype much later, when you get to the hype, right, you think these agents are transforming entire processes. No, they're not, right? That is the end goal, maybe for some, but they're actually quite discrete, basic use cases that have been around for a long time. We can just address them much better with the use of generative AI, for example.
Well, indeed, and up on the screen again for people who are watching, but I'll talk about it for people who aren't. A blog post went out today, which is the 16th, so I'll put that into the show notes, covering the launch of AI HQ from Writer. So I'll put that in there. Up on screen, I've got a little bit of just a little screenshot to remind myself. But they, at their launch last week, one of the things that they said, hey, what we've realized is that process mapping is the new prompt engineering. They use that line. In fact, it was a very popular line amongst people who were watching the launch, and I actually copied and pasted a comment from somebody who was watching online and all of the likes about that. And so the idea that the process mapping might actually now start to be something that you need to do. Now, in the case of Writer, what this is not a task mining tool. This is not a process mining tool. All this is makes it sound like it's basic. It's the ability to do sort of basically a no-code, low-code process design, kind of like you would have done in Visio 20 years ago, if you like, but with the purpose at the end of it of creating that decision tree that your agent is going to work its way along when you ask it to perform certain sets of tasks, right? But what it is, it's formalizing the process as you build the agent out to use, the rest of Writer's, I mean, predominantly content creation tools, and it's really designed around, content heavy, marketing organizations, particularly around, marketing content, product content, and that kind of stuff for clients. That's really what it's there. But it was kind of heartening to see that the idea that you really got to take processes seriously early in the iteration of doing this stuff, if you want to be successful. And it wasn't us saying it. Writer as a customer, we didn't provide them with that information. That's just something that they've come up with wholly independently. So it's great that that's now starting to come a bit more to the fore.
Yeah, and just a quick thing on that. So, we're not here to sell process and task mining tools, but it is worrisome that market isn't growing at the pace it should be growing at, because it's an indicator that projects are not being done properly. So, I mean, it makes sense, right? Whether you're ServiceNow, Salesforce, Oracle, it doesn't matter, or Highland, it doesn't matter. You should be leading with process mapping. And for what it's worth, our sort of viral infographic of last year, the 5 questions to ask, whether you're AI ready or not, what are the first 2? Have you identified the process? Do you know what the tasks are inside? Right?
Yep.
Unless you can answer those 2 questions, this isn't going to go well.
No, and I think, one thing, I mean, there is from a M&A perspective, a lot of very good value, particularly task mining tools out there right now. I think
they should all be snapped up. I mean, they should. And they
absolutely.
Should
I can't believe that there are big business application stacks out there who don't have their own owned combination of the two. Not picking one or other. Ultimately, it's like a big combination of the two. If you're a big stack, if you're dealing with big applications where the process mining stuff is particularly useful, or you're dealing with multi-application ad hoc workflows where task mining is better, you're going to need them both in your stack to do this properly. I'm amazed that hasn't.
So advice to the market: if you are one of those big players, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Oracle,
ServiceNow have bought one. ServiceNow did acquire one.
They did. Buy these and bundle them in as standard functionality, and get all of your community, your ecosystem, who are implementing agents to use them.
They are your agent on ramp.
Yes, they are.
That's exactly. I mean, just as they've been used for. I mean, UiPath acquired them to be their RPA on ramp, to now be their agent on ramp. They're well set in that respect. Other people are not as well set as UiPath, but Microsoft have made some investments, but not done a lot with it. Salesforce have a good partnership, but aren't doing a lot with it. ServiceNow made a small acquisition, so it's not like nobody's touching it, but it just hasn't reached that criticality within projects yet that it should have done.
Yeah, I mean, SAP obviously bought one as well. The key thing here is though the ecosystem, right? Your partner ecosystem. Mm-hmm. They should be using these tools.
Yep. Just before we move on to the next little bit, which is kind of also graph related, which is probably why I put this graph in here. We've got just a little bit of the market, the work intelligence market sizing up here, just so you can see what we're currently projecting as the likely growth rates for it. Now, if you're looking at the graph and going, Matt, that some of that graph is going down. Well, this is kind of interesting, and the reason is that not all markets grow exponentially forever, despite what some market sizings will tell you, and also growth rates are not always 150%, right? Actually, a growth rate that we're projecting for 2026 in this market of 9.2% is a really healthy growth, in the current market, and we're projecting it, rising at between 9.2 and 9.9% over the next 3 years, which in the current macroeconomic climate is a really good growth percentage.
It is, and I just can't help myself, but if you see reports out there from other analyst firms that are predicting 30-40% growth of anything, don't believe it.
No, it's horse.
That's just not how the world works. It just doesn't work like that.
No, I mean, graphs will go up because, of course, as we see on that graph there, even as the market grows slower, the graph still goes up because, hey, the bars are cumulative, people. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's growing as fast as it was. We've got it contracting a little bit towards the end of the growth period for 2030. But we do change this every year as trends change. There are some adjustments in there. But again, hopefully that gives you an idea of apparently how bullish we still are about process tools.
We're very bullish about it, but just on the numbers thing, and again, just a word of advice for anybody who's listening, right? Don't believe 30-40% because they're not true. And secondly, yes, if you start at 0 and you have 100% growth the next year, well, yeah, because you started at 0. It's not
a low bar.
Yeah, it's about as low as it can go. Yeah.
Well, let's keep that train of thought and move on to the next topic, which is marking our homework. For some reason, throughout my career, I've got this reputation for being a bit sloppy. And I think it's just because my hair's always a mess, and I cut it myself with kitchen scissors. But actually, in terms of my rigor, particularly everything's around data, I'm a nightmare to work with, as Alan and Dan will attest, about being really pernickety about making sure stuff is right. And one of the things that I've always been a bit snippy about from year to year is throughout the over 30 years now I've been in this industry, I've read market projections throughout this period. I have never read a market projection that's ever that a market isn't doing gangbusters and is always going to go up by a huge percentage. In fact, I know this exercises Alan enough because he recorded a special video complaining about this, which I will link to in the show notes, I think a 1.5 minute of solid ranting on this subject. But I decided to be a bit more practical about it. When I started to write the underlying market model, which sort of defines the market predictions which are in this big report in 2022, I had in my mind that I want to make sure that we don't rip it up each year and throw it in the bin, right? We update it and we record the delta between each year's predictions, which meant from the beginning, I always planned to say, hey, we thought 2025 would look like this in 2022 or 2023. What does it actually look like, and how much will we outbuy, or how much will we overbuy, or how much will we underbuy? And then, because I don't think anybody else does this. So I put out a blog post a couple of weeks afterwards, as this was the third year. It was the first time we really had some decent numbers to be able to compare year on year, and I thought that was a good thing to put out there. I mean, it's not been most spectacularly successful post I've ever published. Don't get me wrong, but it's a line in the sand, I think, from me, which is I am going to always mark my homework in public. I'm going to show you my previous prediction, and I'm subsequently going to tell you how much over or under I was out on that, because it helps you gauge how realistic my current numbers are.
Yeah, and it's when I started as an analyst, I'm losing my voice here.
Yeah.
When I started as an analyst, I've got it's blossom season in Philadelphia.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, which is very beautiful, but anyway. But when I started as an analyst at Open, I mean, fair dues to that era of the analyst industry. We did start from scratch every year, and we did compare. I don't know that we went out and publicly said where we got it wrong. I don't think we did that. But one of the things you do have to be careful of with analyst projections is that a lot of analyst companies don't do that. They'll take that whatever they predicted last year was right, and they will build on it. And if you look at the world we're living in, that's pretty risky. But that's how you end up with markets that are always growing when they're not. Yeah.
Now up on screen, I've got the graph from that blog post. Again, links in show notes. Blah blah blah. You know how this goes. But just to give you a visual indicator of how far we're out, so you can see it. On screen, the yellows are the actuals. So they're the kind of the actual numbers. So when we go through, we calculate what is the market doing right now. The yellows are the actuals, and the shades of blue are the predicted ones from that year. So for 2023, there were no predicted 2023s because it's the first year we did the report. In 2024, we were out by about 0.8%. And in 2025, the first year's prediction was out by nearly 4%, or around 4%. The precise numbers are in the blog post. So obviously, as we get further on, that original 2023 prediction is likely to skew out a little bit more for all sorts of reasons. One, as we talked about earlier on, we were perhaps a little over optimistic about the growth rate albeit it's the smallest portion, it's from a low bar, but we probably overestimated the growth early in this cycle for the process and task mining. And also macroeconomic changes have had an impact, and also AI sucking a lot of the oxygen out of this portion of projects and into AI tools has also had an impact here. These aren't excuses. What they are effects which change the model.
No, but for those of you watching this on YouTube, the reason we've got this chart up is to basically say we nailed it. We're doing really well here. If you're out by 4% on a big market, man, you're good. So, but you are. I mean, this is really good. I mean, we are in the ballpark here, because none of these numbers are ever going to be 100% accurate. It's impossible. That's an absolutely impossible thing to do. But what we're basically saying is here, particularly if you're a technology vendor or a systems integrator, use our numbers, get this report, and then seriously, because these are the real numbers.
Yeah, right? And in fact, I didn't realize I put this slide into the set. So if you're watching it, you can actually see the quotes on there. That first year we were out by 0.82. Then from the original one into this year, we're out 4.12. But from last year, we're out by 1.58. Now this is in a $15 to $17 billion business, so you can work out quite quickly what those amounts mean. They're relatively small. They're actually not relatively small in the context of that sub-market. But if you want to get into those details, buy the report, steal the report, read the report at least, and you can understand where those are. And it's all reflected, of course, within the report itself.
Just to add to that, Matt, I mean, what we're saying here really is that, and yeah, we are just blowing our own trumpet again, but the end of the day, these numbers are for investors. These are for people building strategies and futures in this market. They're not for marketing purposes. If you want marketing purpose numbers, then go somewhere else, because they'll make them up for you and they'll be really big. But if you're
I saw one yesterday, which I need to talk to you about offline, Alan. But you reminded me of very, very big numbers. Oh boy. Unfortunately, we can't, for all sorts of sensible legal reasons, talk about it during the podcast. So you're going to have to buy us a coffee and ask about that one.
It is really worrying that some people make investments based on those numbers.
Yeah. At least that gives you an insight into what I spend my time doing in the spreadsheets. And in fact, there is a new product coming, which I've been working on with spreadsheets for the last couple of months, which will be coming up for subscribers with the next quarterly update. So you don't escape my spreadsheets for very long. Anyway, we're now on to our last topic. You may remember that for the last few months, the three of us talked about analyst value. So we were saying, hey, here are some of the ways in which industry analysts really increase value, and here are some ways in which they really decrease value. Well, I wrapped all of that up. I put it into a blog post as promised, which has now been published, show notes, etc. But that meant, having had that topic finished, we needed to come up with a new one, and we decided we would go back to the old office favorite of the banned words list. Now, the banned words, if you never had it in your workplace, is words that we've decided as a team that no one's allowed to use anymore for all sorts of reasons. They're cliched, they're hackneyed. These days, it doesn't tend to be because they're grossly offensive. But hey, if you're that kind of office, definitely have that. If you don't, HR will make you have that. But we're talking about stuff here that we don't really want to see in marketing materials. We don't want to see in press releases. We don't want to see it or hear on briefings and that kind of thing. Now, to make this interesting, right, we've got to have some skin in the game ourselves, because we spend our time writing and we're just as guilty of using hackneyed cliche terms as everybody else, right? We don't want, so in order for us in this new game to take a banned word onto the banned word list, we have to give up one of our own. We have to take a cliche that we like to use and we have to give it up. And if you see us using one of the things we gave up, our penance is to use the banned word in a blog post, every blog post for a year, to make up for our conceited banning things. We're not banning our own stuff. So this is basically words we won't use, and in exchange for that, words we don't want to read. Hopefully that's clear, Alan. That the game makes sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. So here's our first one. Alan, you have decided to trade your use of the word hype, which we know you like to use a lot.
I do.
And in exchange for hype, you want to ban the use of out of the box. Why out of the box? What's it done to you?
Because nothing's out of the box. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's as simple as that, right? It's not true. Right? Oh, we've got an out of the box connected to SharePoint. Yeah, well, okay. So, that's it. You just flick a switch and it understands everything that's in SharePoint and everything's working seamlessly.
You don't have to log in. There's no credentials required here.
No, it's nonsense, right? So, but it's just one of those words, those phrases, I guess, rather than word. But it just drives me nuts. I mean, some connectors are relatively straightforward. Some are very complex. None of them work out of the box.
And if there's one place I never want to see this ever again, it's in an RFS document, right?
Mm-hmm.
I spent a portion of my career responding to RFX documents, so RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, and another half of them reading and responding to them. There has never been an occasion where the use of out of the box, if it was up to me, made it into any of those documents without a red line through it, because it provides no purpose whatsoever for the buying party, and it allows the selling party to hide complexity.
Yep, it does.
And I think if there's one lesson to take from Alan's word here, it's if you see it in an IFX document that you're going to issue, take it out.
Yeah, it's not true. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
If you say, it's simple, okay. If it is simple, great. Yeah, fine, good. Anyway.
And on the other side of that, having said I've also responded to a lot of these documents, when I would see out of the box, I would know the answer has to be instinctively no, because nothing is. However, in the spirit of probably how the question was mentioned, we would have to say yes, and then with the comments that we were required to do these steps in order to make the out of the box thing work. So we were doing a kind of telling a conditional untruth, which is yes, but no, but yes, kind of. And everybody does this, but it's a dance that you don't need to do if you don't put in the stupid question in the first place.
Yep.
So I have decided to give up a phrase that I've certainly used in blog posts and I've used on our internal messaging system a number of times, which is the one faster horses, which is when I'm complaining that all something is a faster way of doing the old thing rather than actually transforming it and doing it in a more exciting modern way. And it's a bit of I don't think it really is a Henry Fordism. I think it's one of those things that's attributed. So if you ask consumers what they wanted, all they'd say is faster horses rather than a car. I think that's the original origin. But I'm gonna it's not as committed as Alan giving up hype, I'll admit. But to be fair, I wrote my answer down before he wrote his one down. So now I felt I undercommitted to the game. But still, there'll be other chances to get into this. And in return for me not using faster horses, my really big ask is I never want to hear or see the phrase seamlessly integrated ever again. Ever again. Ever again. How about you, Ed? Would you miss that?
No, I won't miss it at all. I mean, the thing is, we live in this low code, no code, apps on the phone world, but it masks immense complexity.
Well, yeah, no code and low code means you don't see the code. It doesn't mean there's not code.
You just don't
see it.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were talking about process mining, right? IT is really, really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, and that's how it is, and that is how it is, and we shouldn't shy away from that. And when we shy away from it, this is where terrible projects crash and burn.
Yeah, and the reason I ended up having to toss a coin here between the phrase seamlessly integrated and deeply integrated, right? Because they're both as bad as each other. They're used to mention to kind of infer different things. Seamlessly integrated is really the kissing cousin of out of the box, really. Whereas deeply integrated is it's integrated in a complicated way that probably isn't out of the box. That's kind of what it's saying. But again, it doesn't say that explicitly and therefore should not exist. In fact, I'd even argue that saying it is integrated with something isn't. There needs to be a qualifier, and the qualifier normally is 100 pages of manual.
Yeah, I mean, just recently I've been writing some sort of, I can't remember what we call them now. We used to call them vendor vignettes, and I still call them vendor vignettes. So,
well, I say vendor profiles and then say afterwards, and we mean vendor vignettes because that's what we used to call them.
Thankfully, we've got an editor who puts the right titles on things. But and I've been writing. I'm not going to name the companies here, but writing about companies that have connectors to SAP, right? Mm-hmm. And on the surface, they're all the same. We can connect to SAP, but to your point, when you pull a layer or two back, whoa, there's some differences. Massive.
Well, yeah, I suspect that we're not covering it today. We may cover some of it in the next podcast, but certainly we're covering it in writing. Now on the agent thing, because we have to mention agents. We've not mentioned agents for 5 minutes, so we need to mention agents again. I think that the agent connecting things, agent connecting protocols, A2A and CP and all these kind of things, which are becoming more prevalent in the actual practicalities of how you start to provision multiple agents inside the various applications that you have. On paper, the way in which they're going to communicate and exchange data looks super, super simple, which means it probably underneath is hiding a multitude of insecurities, credential exchanging, hardening of messaging that's going to happen to make this work in a in a secure environment that right now we're kind of glossing over and pretending doesn't exist. So we're not suggesting that everything should be simple. We're actually saying the opposite. Sometimes you shouldn't obscure the complexity, because all that's doing is kicking a can down the road and something you're going to have to get into the weeds of later on, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and just as we're sort of wrapping up here, I just realized, so for those on YouTube, I'm actually wearing a San Francisco t-shirt from the company San Francisco. They've got a shop at Terminal 1 in San Francisco Airport, and I buy one each time because they're locally sourced and that. So I'm very San Francisco today.
You're sitting on Philly representing San Francisco.
I am today, yeah. Salesforce and San Francisco. But no, it's great. The banned word list. I guarantee I'll fail within 2 or 3 days of my commitments here. But these words, they are important.
If you fail, we're going to have to make you wear it, and everything is out of the box t-shirt all through conference season.
Yeah, Alan out of the box.
Alan out of the box. Anyway, that's it. That's all we've got time for, and about 6 minutes more. Next time, 3 more topics, 30 minutes to discuss them in. Alan, thanks as ever for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. And I will see you again next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.